Hi, this is Congressman Tom Cole. This is another one of our congressional weekly chats. In some ways, this was a busy week in Congress. We dealt with a major piece of legislation which frankly could have and should have been bipartisan. Last year, the United States Senate began working on and eventually passed in June a bill to enable us to compete more effectively with China. There's everything in it from incentives for chip manufacturers to relocate in the United States, the reauthorization of some of our basic research programs. It's a pretty sizable bill. We don't really know how much it costs. The House was working on a version in different committees, and then frankly, I think Democrats decided last week when Congress was not in session to rewrite the bill. That never went through any committee as a complete bill. We don't have a cost estimate from the Congressional Budget Office. We do think it costs over $300 billion. And as people look through it, it simply had a lot of Build Back Better bill, particularly a lot of climate change legislation packed in it. And so while there were elements that people agreed with, the bill became extraordinarily partisan. It was really written by Speaker Pelosi in her office, sort of cobbled together, different things out of different committees. Even her own members had very little input on the final product. And so, not surprisingly, what could have been a very big bipartisan bill, as it was in the United States Senate, became a very partisan bill in the House. It passed the House on Friday morning very narrowly, on essentially a straight party line vote. Almost every Republican voting no, almost every Democrat voting yes. And that bill will now go into conference. That'll be the House position. The Senate will have its more bipartisan version, and we'll see what they come up with. But this was certainly not a way to work together across the aisle against a problem we all agree, or on a problem that we all agree that we have, and that's the rise of China, its aggressive tactics, its unfair competitive process, its stealing of intellectual property, its rattling of sabers in the China Sea, South China Sea, and the East China Sea, engaged in genocide, according to both the Trump and the Biden administration, against the Uyghur Muslims. Again, this is something all Americans should have been able to work together on. Sadly, Speaker Pelosi and the Democratic majority chose a different route, and so the fate of this legislation, I think, now is very uncertain. And that's too bad, because again, there are things that each side could agree on that could have been a big bipartisan win. Instead, again, this is another effort to cram through an enormous spending bill. It's interesting that the United States Chamber of Commerce, which supported the Senate version of the bill, came out in opposition to the Democratic House bill, simply because of all the provisions added in it, which were anti-competitive. And there was billions of dollars sent to international funds on climate control that we know China will actually have access to. In other words, we would have been using American taxpayer dollars to support a repressive regime and help it in its efforts to confront us. Hardly what I think anybody should really want to do. So that was the big action of the week here. There's also ongoing negotiations on trying to get the appropriations bills passed in one form or another. The government does run out of money on February 15th. I do not believe we will have a government shutdown. I do believe there'll be another continuing resolution which simply extends the budget enacted the last year of the Trump administration for another period of time. Perhaps by March we can come to a deal, but that deal has to be bipartisan. There simply aren't the votes to pass it. And it would have to have more defense bill spending than the president recommended. I think most Democrats actually agree with that in Congress. I think you'd have to have less domestic spending than the gargantuan increases recommended by the Biden administration. The Hyde protections for the unborn were stripped out of the appropriations bills. Those will have to come back in to get any kind of Republican support. And there are a lot of so-called poison pill riders, again, a lot of them dealing with climate, that would have to come out, I think, before there's any chance. But Congress sort of inched forward a little bit, but we still don't have the leadership out of the White House we need. We still don't know whether or not we will actually be able to come to a deal. Hopefully we will, but that's to be determined in the days and weeks ahead. Congress also, and I think Washington in general, has watched with a great deal of interest and concern as Russia continues to mass troops on the border of the Ukraine. We've had the administration, frankly, say while we're not going to fight in Ukraine, they're not an ally of the United States. We are going to provide military assistance, and that there will be severe sanctions if the Russians move ahead. That doesn't seem to have stopped Vladimir Putin, the leader of Russia, from continuing again to rattle the cages a little bit and threaten to move into Ukraine. And so I think we wait his final decision with a great deal of concern and trepidation. The administration did give all of Congress a top secret brief on the state of affairs yesterday, Thursday. Not able to talk to you about that other than people should be very concerned. If Russia moves, this will be the largest military action in Europe since the Second World War, and we don't know what the objectives are. We don't know if it would just be a partial takeover of Ukrainian territory, something similar to what we saw in the Obama years when Putin took back Crimea and parts of the Ukraine, and even before that when he took parts of eastern Georgia in the very end of the Bush administration. Or would this be an effort to take over the entire country, or to at least depose the current regime, which is pro-Western and very much wants to be a member of NATO and aligned with Europe and the United States, and replace it with a regime that's friendly to Putin? So it's very high stakes. Again, the international community, at least what we think of as the Western nations, have all uniformly told Russia it would be a huge mistake to go into the Ukraine, but that didn't stop Putin in 2014. I think he watched what happened in Afghanistan this summer, and I think he thinks the United States and this administration are weak, and I'm very fearful that he may move ahead, and that would create enormous tensions between our country and certainly Russia, but also China as well. And the Chinese are watching this. They're trying to determine what to do in terms of Taiwan and some of their other territorial grievances. And again, if they sense American weakness, the risk of them doing something that might precipitate a conflict in the Western Pacific gets higher. So it's a very tense time on the international stage, and I think that certainly has a lot of attention in Congress as well. Hopefully, if something like that were to happen, we could work and move together. But again, we still remain divided on a lot of fundamental issues, and our adversaries are trying to take advantage of that, again, as they did during the Afghan situation in the summer of 2021. With that, we'll just continue to work through things. Hopefully the approach process will get a little bit better. Hopefully we'll see something very different coming out of the conference committee on China than we sent into China. And hopefully, again, we can find some common ground going forward. And that's what we'll be working toward.